Hello and welcome to Holy Smokes, Cigars and Spirituality. I am Christian, the host and the heretic and the pastor of the Faith Community, the organization, the community of faith, the church that sponsors Holy Smokes. Shout out to all of my TFC fam and shout out to everybody who supports Holy Smokes and TFC on Patreon, those who are in the live virtual audience, and those of you who are listening on our podcast platforms. Thank you so much. Today, we're back with another episode called Church Misogyny, a Privileged Perspective. So this is going to be interesting because we just got the fellas here today. The Patreon community said they wanted to hear the fellas talk about misogyny. So I don't know where this is going to go. We'll figure out in a minute. But I'm really excited to have my good friend, Lord Stephen Thurston, who happens to be the father of the Faith Community. You met him last. I wish you could see what he was doing for those who are listening right now. That was like Ocean, the people out in Oregon. That's how he would have come in with his hands like this. Yeah. So we're excited. We're excited about today. Steve, go ahead and say hello to the peoples.
What's up, fellow heretics? Glad to be in Hades with you today.
Yeah, well, this is going to be interesting, as you can see. So we're going to go ahead and get into it. But first, we got to give you the one rule. And today, for the one rule, we got Grayson the pundit going to give us the one rule. Grayson, what you got?
Well, we here at the Faith Community talk about a lot of topics that have to do with our embodied, lived lives. And so we here at the Faith Community, of which this is a ministry of and under umbrella of, has a one rule, which is that we respect each other's lived experiences above theories. So if someone were to say something that clashes with your doctrine or your theory or your belief, we have as an ethic that we privilege lived experience over that theory. So if something makes you uncomfortable, we encourage you to listen to the lived experience and maybe have it change your mind and not change someone's life to fit your mind. Is someone going to tell me one more?
One more time.
Give it to us one more again.
Oh, thank God. The one rule is that we honor each other's lived experiences and don't lift theories over what people have actually lived. Healthy debates are welcome, but kindness is key.
Grayson, give it to him one more time.
Hit me,
Harder,
baby.
Grayson, harder, harder.
Looks like I left Grindr open. The one rule is that we honor each other's lived experiences and don't uplift theories over what people have actually lived. Healthy debates are welcome, but kindness is key. And that is all rooted in a system of theology that has been curated by Christian A. Smith, one of many Christian Smiths. He's not the Smith, he is just one of them, Christian A. Smith, which is rooted in Matthew 22, 34 through 40, where we have Jesus telling the legal expert how to inherit eternal life. He says, your love for God is displayed, we're paraphrasing, through how you love your neighbor, which is an extension of how you love yourself. Therefore, at the Faith Community, everything we do is based in and flows out of the idea that you can't fully love God if you don't love your neighbor, and you can't fully love your neighbor if you don't love yourself. That's what we do here.
Thank you, Grayson.
Take it away.
You did that like you were an announcer on Jeopardy or something. Tell him what he's won.
Eternal life.
All right. So let's get into some introductions here. You got the one rule, so you know how we roll. Introductions today. We're doing misogyny, a privileged perspective. So I want everybody to tell me, what are you smoking and drinking, if anything? Because of course they're both optional here at Holy Smokes. We don't require people to smoke and drink because some people don't need to smoke and drink for a number of reasons. But if you are doing either, we ask that you do it in moderation. So if you are smoking or drinking, tell us what you're having. And then here's the question, since we're talking about it from a privileged perspective, how old were you the first time you saw a woman preach from the main podium of your church? That will be the introduction question for today. So again, I'm Christian A. Smith. I'm the host and the heretic. I am having the Holy Smoke cigar today. Yes, I haven't had the Holy Smoke cigar on an episode in a while. Shout out to all of our patrons in the Cigar Club and the aficionados. You have Holy Smoke cigars coming to you this month. You got some coming this month, so look out for them in the mail. And the first time I saw a woman preach from the main podium of the pulpit, for me, was actually very early. Like I mentioned in my book when I wrote about my dad, he was disruptive for his time. And my dad was ordaining women to preach and licensing women to preach back in like the 80s and 90s, which is like, in his context, was kind of unheard of. So I know I saw women preach from the pulpit when I lived in Oakland at Pilgrim Rest Baptist Church, where I moved from Oakland when I was 10. But when he took over in San Diego at Calvary Baptist Church, I remember one time there was this conversation that I overheard, because like as a kid, I wasn't supposed to listen to these conversations, but I overheard this conversation about how my dad like wanted to put a woman in the pulpit, but the church wasn't ready for it. And like he like went along because he was trying to bring the church along. So like she had to preach from the side podium because that was what the people would be able to digest. So that is my take or my story. Let's kick it over to Myron the Mystic.
Hey, folks, Myron the Mystic. I am excited to be with us one more time as we talk about misogyny. Boy, this is going to be an interesting topic tonight. I am not smoking or drinking. I'm inside. It's raining outside. I don't have any of those fancy, filtration systems. So I can't smoke inside. I've just got a little cup of coffee.
Oh, we know you don't have a filter, Myron.
Yeah, you know it. You know it. I'm going to say it like it is and smoke it like it too. And so that's it. But now, the first time I ever heard a woman preach, believe it or not, in the church I was baptized in, never heard a woman preach. And to this day, they've never had a woman preach from the podium in that church because they do not believe in women preachers. When I was about 11 or 12, I moved to another church, a church across town that was full gospel Baptist. And that was the first time that I saw a woman preach in the pulpit of my church. And it was probably one of the best sermons I'd ever heard. Matter of fact, it was so good, I've been trying to recreate that sermon since I heard it. And so I'm not going to tell you what it was. So if you hear me preach it, you won't know I stole it from her. Shout out to Trish Blair. That's who preached it. That was the first woman I heard in person. Yeah, I'd seen women on television and stuff like that, but I'd never seen one in my personal pulpit till Trish Blair. So there we go.
Thank you, Myron. I appreciate that. Grayson, how about you?
Hey, y'all. Once again, it's me, Grayson Hester. Pronouns he, him, his. And I am drinking Elijah Craig, some straight whiskey, LOL, courtesy of my cousin John Hill. Enjoying it. Oh, okay.
Yes, straight whiskey, LOL. Everybody knows what you were trying to say.
What could it possibly be? Yeah, so shout out to John Hill, my cousin, who I trust with bourbon, and so I am enjoying this. And the first time I ever saw a woman preach from like the main podium at my church, I kind of like Christian. I can't really remember when it was because it wouldn't have been a big deal at my church growing up. Talked about it a lot, not in my book since I don't have one, but have talked about growing up in the liberal church of Jefferson City, Tennessee, First Baptist Church, Jefferson City, where we always were open to the idea of a woman pastor, always, at least in my lifetime, said that we would ordain and did ordain women deacons. And so it is remarkable that it is unmemorable that I had a woman pastor. But interestingly, now First Baptist does have a woman pastor. Shout out to Ellen DeJosia. She was called in 2017. And looking back at the last 7 years of my life, I have not had a white man as a pastor in 7 years because I had 2 women one of whom was a lesbian in Nashville. I had another woman in Birmingham. I had a married lesbian couple co-pastor in DC. Then I had interim at my church, and now I'm at the Faith Community. So I literally haven't heard the word of God from a white man in a very long time, and I'm the better for it.
No wonder you're so lost.
Grayson, I got to tell you, I had a woman in Birmingham too, but it didn't work out. So God bless you.
That sounds like a country song. I had a woman in Birmingham.
Pull some out for Rebecca. God bless you.
I was looking for a woman. She wasn't looking for a man.
Oh God. Thank you, Grayson.
Thanks.
Look, let's keep it moving. We got our special guest, Lord Stephen J. Thurston, with us today. Steve, what are you smoking and drinking? And when was the first time you heard a woman preach from the podium in the pulpit at your church?
I've got Ice Mountain as my beverage of choice today, clear spring water. And then I've got the Tabac Especial Drew Estate, amazing cigar if you've never smoked it before. It gets you closer to God. I recall my dad ordaining a female at our church, which again, because Christian's dad and my dad are from the same ilk, same school, same era generation, he ordained her. I must have been away at Morehouse during that period. Very faithful member of the church. He knew that she was serious and wasn't on some bullshit about being called to preach. And though he did not really push or, support, believe in, he believed in her. So he went ahead and ordained her. And then she moved her membership. There was no drama there. She moved her membership to a church that would allow her to preach, so on and so forth. And then as my dad began to evolve, I think Kimberly Ray, if you're familiar with her, she was the first female that preached at New Covenant, pulpit and all. And that must have been maybe like 8 years ago. So not like super long ago. And now my dad has a female as a part of his ministerial staff and team. So yeah, it's been a slow evolution there at New Covenant. But of course, I've been in other spaces and places. And whenever I questioned my dad about it, he was like, if God called them to preach, that's fine. They can go do whatever they want to. That just wasn't the ilk of the church that he pastored, that my grandfather pastored, that my great grandfather pastored. But he shifted over the past few years. So we flowing.
Hey, thank God for evolution. I mean, and I think we should all take time to appreciate that, we're all in a process, and hopefully we're all growing and we're all learning more and we're all opening ourselves up to more as we grow. And because I think sometimes we expect everybody to already be there, and it's just not that way. I think we got to give people the space to go through their process. I might be further along, but I remember when I was in a space where there were certain things that I'm just totally open to now that I wasn't open to in the past. So, shout out to Dr. Stephen Thurston for that evolution and showing and modeling a way on how we can grow and how we can become better. Yeah, that's good. That's good. All right. So we're going to get into this conversation in just a minute. But we got to go ahead and do our cigar tip. And for today, we have our main man, Myron the Mystic, who is going to bring us Myron's cigar moment. Give him his music.
Hey, folks, it's good to see you once again. Let me tell you a quick story. The other day, I got a phone call when I was leaving work. And they said, Myron, I haven't seen you in a long time. The world is opening up again. Let's go smoke a stick. And I won't tell you who this person was, but I said, sure, I will meet you at an undisclosed cigar location. Met them there, had a couple sticks in my car, bought the sticks out, clipped them, began to light them. And then one of the most embarrassing things happened. Because the sticks were in my car, they had dried out. And so as I smoked the stick, it began to unravel while I was smoking the stick. Embarrassing as hell, I tell you. I started to lick it, thinking, oh, that's going to help me to put it back together again. To Grayson, just shut up. Just shut up. I know what you're thinking. But the cigar, I was about to lick the cigar, and I thought, oh, that would wrap it back together again. But it didn't help. It didn't help. When an old man who was sitting in the corner, who had been smoking for years, and every time I go to that cigar place, is there, came over to me and said, man, let me teach you a little something. When your cigar starts to unravel like that, go ahead in your pocket and pull out your chapstick. Take your chapstick, put it on the cigar, and it'll hold it back together. And that way, it'll stop it from unraveling, and you can smoke the rest of your cigar. So that's my tip. What that old man told me, that if your cigar starts to unravel, so embarrassing, pull out your chapstick, put it back together, smoke the rest of your cigar. That's my tip, man.
Yo, I so appreciate that.
Right?
That
Doesn't that happen to you sometime?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I just would have recommended that you open, pinch, roll, and hold.
So we're talking about misogyny today, huh? So I'm not gonna even.
Yo, that was a really good tip. Yes, and Keosha said she wants to meet you in person. Keosha, it's everybody's dream to meet Myron in person.
Not everybody, but I mean, it's my dream to meet you. I'd love to meet you soon.
Great tip, man. Great tip. I'm gonna keep that in mind because sometimes my cigars unravel. You never know. So it just happens. All right, so we're gonna get into this formal discussion about misogyny in the church from a privileged perspective. And I want to go ahead and establish right now, because it seems like last season we talked a whole lot about sex. And then this season, at least so far, we've talked about a number of topics where we need to have a working definition of that particular term, because we're talking about ideas that are identified by one name, but it has so many different understandings. Like when we talked about femininity, we had to establish what is a working definition of femininity. The same thing with masculinity. I believe we should do that as well when it comes to misogyny. So for the sake of today's discussion, as we're discussing this topic, a working definition of misogyny is going to be real textbook, straight from the dictionary. Misogyny is a dislike of, contempt for, or ingrained prejudice against women. Now, it's very important that you don't have to have a dislike for, contempt for, and ingrained prejudice. It could be any of those three, according to this definition. So I know somebody who will be listening to this, or who may even be watching this right now as we record it, may say, well, I don't dislike women. All right, that doesn't mean that you've never participated in misogyny or systems that promote misogyny. Because I think one thing that will get a whole lot of us is that ingrained prejudice, which I think is, something that we might jump on here in just a little bit. So that's the working definition that we're going with on misogyny today. And let's just go ahead and get it started like this. Lord Stephen Thurston is here, so I believe we should give him the mic first. Steve, will you tell us, where have you seen misogyny being played out in the church in your experience?
I would say the fact that, especially in the Black church context, about 85% of the membership is female. But when you look at higher levels of leadership, they don't make it there. There's a glass ceiling that's presented itself. And I think a lot of that boils down to the fact that a lot of men don't like women. They like vaginas, but they don't like women. And so that puts us in a place where we get back to this whole power and dominance thing that helps us to subjugate women. And then, just as the Bible is a pro-slavery document and manual, the Bible is also a pro-sexist and misogynist document and manual. And so we have to wrestle with those tensions there.
This man just said most men don't like women. They like vaginas, though. Yeah, you always do this. For those who are listening and don't know, Stephen was on an episode in season 3 called "Should Black People Be Christians?" If you have not checked out that episode, please go check it out. And that is the type of heat that Steve brings. Jeez, oh my God. Myron, what are your thoughts, man?
I don't know where I go from that, right? Like, it's just, first of all, I got to tell you, folks, I was kind of nervous about this episode, and I was thinking, why am I a part of an episode that deals with misogyny? Because I'm not interpersonally misogynistic, right? I don't mistreat women. I try to amplify their voices, right? I'm concerned about the plight of women, right? Then I thought, why am I on this episode? And then I had to kind of step back and say, oh, but I participated in systems where women have been subjugated and silenced and have benefited from a privilege that I did not necessarily deserve because I was a man. And so I really think this conversation is important because this is men being, oh boy, I'm trying to figure out how to say this. I'm gonna define it in a minute. This is men being epistemologically self-conscious. Right? This is us taking a step back and looking at our own thought patterns and saying, this is where this came from. And this is how it's been ingrained into us from culture. So I want to start there and say it's really important for us to have this conversation. And I probably should tell a story to tell you why this really, I'll never forget. Okay, quick story.
Before you go into your story, somebody hit him with the dollar jar. Please.
I defined it.
He did not.
You did not define epistemology. You did not.
It's looking at our thought patterns, right? The origin of our thoughts. Didn't you remember I said that?
Why we know what we know.
It was just such a smooth definition. Y'all missed it. I said it.
You got to be clear. So epistemology is a study of understanding how we know what we know, right?
It was the origin of thoughts. You got it,
origin of thoughts.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like
so
Paul's epistles.
I called it Myron.
Thank you. That's why I like Thurston. You could be on every episode, Thurston. Every single one. Now listen, let me tell this damn story here. When I went to ORU, one of the first things we did at ORU was we were getting ready to build a brand new student center. Okay. And in order to build the new student center, we had to get rid of the old building that was there. And we had this big thing where we were going to watch them blow up the old building, where it was going to implode and fall to the ground as we celebrated because they were going to build the new student center, right? Well, we went out to this field. The president was there. He had that old-fashioned push thing to push the dynamite. He pushed it, and not a damn thing happened. It went poof, and nothing blew up. It was as lackluster, and it was horrible, right? Everybody was embarrassed. We left. And then eventually they tore that sucker down with a crane, right? Like the crane. What do you call that? You know, the truck, the Tonka truck. What do you call that thing?
Wrecking ball?
Wrecking ball, you know, they got the little thing on the end. Y'all know what I'm talking about. They tore it down manually as opposed to with the dynamite. And a couple years later, I got to work in the president's office. And I asked the lady who ran the process, what happened? Why did it not blow up? And she said, well, because they scheduled it so fast that they didn't get a chance to study the structure before they tried to demolish the structure. And she said, the engineer came to us and said, you got to look at three things before you try and blow this up. You got to look at its structure, its substrate, and its substance. Because those are the things that keep a building standing. And so I think this conversation is important because this is us looking at the structure of misogyny, what holds it up. This is us looking at the substrate, how deep it goes, and then ultimately the substrate, what is it made of? And that's when we finally can ameliorate or get rid of misogyny as a whole. Be with me. Hang out with me. I'm gonna define it. I promise you, except for the times I don't. So, okay. So we gotta have these conversations so we can figure out how misogyny stands so that we can blow it up and that we can get rid of it and put men and women back on the same playing field. My next comment, I want to talk about the fact that I think men and women should be on the same playing field because there's this false theological narrative that we're in opposition to one another. But go ahead, Grayson, you're up next.
No, that's good. That's good. And I'm gonna cover the last dollar because you did define ameliorate as you said it. So,
and I used it earlier in the season, though, right? So once I use it in the season, I get to no.
Sometimes that might work, but not with ameliorate. No,
I'm gonna give you the $1. You just put it on a P squared shirt for me. I got a balance anyway.
Right. No, that's good. And leave it to Myron to give us the topic in 3 points. He is such a preacher, y'all. Like, and this is Myron doesn't put on for the camera. I just want y'all to know this is not like Myron showing off. Like Myron talks like this every day. It's amazing. I'm astounded by it when it happens.
Really very sad. It's really it's gotten me nowhere. I mean, it got me on Holy Smokes. That's somewhere. It got me to Holy Smokes. Other than that.
Grayson, I mean, what do you think? Where have you seen misogyny play out? And like, do you have any thoughts about what's been shared?
So I, growing up in a good Baptist church, I've seen people wash a foot, but I've never seen someone massage a knee. I just wanted to see your reaction.
What is wrong with you? What is wrong with you? Why do you do this all the time? And why does your brain work like that?
Okay, I gotta go to bed, she said. Whew. Okay, let me bring it back. So I'm going to take a Myron approach, except for that little comment I just made. Yes, Mom. And talk about when I first, I guess, remember encounter. No, I made it up. I was thinking of it. I ain't been saving that. Don't come at me like that. Don't put that evil on me, Ricky Bobby. I remember the first time that I can remember experiencing and like realizing in a life-changing way misogyny in the church. And it was when I was in 7th grade. I won't tell you the year, so Christian and Pam and the rest of y'all don't get mad at me. But it was when I was in 7th grade. And my brother and I were basically conscripted, drafted into service by my granddad to go up to Roanoke, Virginia, to help this church that was like a non-denominational evangelical startup strip mall church build their church building. It was part of like my granddad's church's mission project. And so, of course, being in 7th grade and junior year of high school, me and my brother, we did not want to go because that's not what you want to do during your summer break. So we go up there and we get there like on a Sunday. The preacher is like basically every stereotype you've seen about just like conservative evangelical pastors. Like he was very rotund, meaning round. He wore suspenders. I'm just picturing him as like some like To Kill a Mockingbird era judge. And he was talking about in his sermon why the world's about to end. And Obama had just been elected, totally unrelated, I'm sure. I guess it wouldn't have been it was 2009 because 2007 Obama wouldn't have been elected. 2009. And so then he just basically had a throwaway comment about like, and then this woman came up to me and she said that she wanted to preach. And then the congregation was just like, oh, how dare she? That dumb whore. They didn't say that, but essentially that was the sentiment. And I remember my brother and me both like freezing. And like, I had this gut feeling of like, wait, what did he say? She's not allowed to preach? What? And that's the first time I ever encountered it. And because I had grown up in the church that I did, to hear someone say that blatantly was like a visceral gut reaction. And that, helped define by what I wasn't my faith and the way that I grew up. So that's like the moment I always go back to about that preacher. And then I'm sure my time is running out soon, but I do want to say and we'll get back to this later, that I'm in a unique position of both benefiting from and being oppressed by misogyny because of the way that sexism and heterosexism are so interrelated. And so it's because of me being gay and me being as a woman and having more of an effeminate, or at least in touch with effeminate orientation, that is part of why I'm oppressed, even though I benefit from it. So I've seen it played out there, but I've also seen it played out in my own narrative and like on my own body, which is something really interesting to dig into.
Yeah, I can totally respect that, right? Because misogyny is weaponized against anything that is effeminate. So it's like weaponized primarily against women, but then it's weaponized against men who we claim act like women. So you bring up a great point. For me personally, there were a number of times I saw misogyny play out. One that comes to mind, and I'm so glad I've been delivered from receiving invitations from churches that really don't want to hear what I have to say. They just want me to say what they're accustomed to in a very creative way. But at one point in my ministry, as I was going through my theological evolution, I began to share my theology publicly, but not everybody was researching me before they invited me to their church. So I had some situations where I was going to a church that invited me, and look, I was broke. I needed to check. So I needed to put some money in my account and keep food on the table at times. So I took some of these invites, and Pamela would go with me because I just needed, like, sometimes I needed Pamela, my wife, to be there with me just to kind of like keep me sane, because I was dealing with like some really heavy misogynistic, like colonized Christianity that I had just like kind of moved beyond. And I went to this church, and Pamela and I went to the pastor's office, and we were sitting back there. We were just kind of chatting it up before the worship started. And then the pastor was like, all right, we're about to pray. And he called in all the men. And he said, Miss Smith, one of the ladies will come and take you out to your seat, because she couldn't be there when the men prayed. And before the prayer, and like everybody said this in unison, which let me know, oh, this is how they always do this. And they always put this kind of emphasis on it intentionally. They started in saying, behold, how good and pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. And they all said it together. That's Psalms 133. And it was like, they put so much emphasis on brethren. And I was like, whoa, okay, this is really interesting. Like, I felt weirded out immediately. Like, my wife couldn't even be in here for prayer because of your misappropriation of this text that said how good it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. So like, all of us can't dwell together in unity. It has to just be the brethren. I was like a little bit disturbed by that. And I was glad the next year, after this pastor found out about my public theology, that he like disinvited me. He rescinded his invitation, because he had been inviting me every year to come preach at his church. And he saw what I was talking about. He said, yeah, we going in a different direction this year. I said, okay, cool. God bless you.
Christian, they knew you weren't going to participate in the circle jerk that year. That's all.
Say brethren, say brethren.
Exactly.
Wild episode. Now, you know what's funny, Smith? That happens to you all the time. Remember that time I was your armor bearer? I'm a horrible armor bearer, FYI. So that's another episode. But Pam came with us, and Pam walked in the pastor's office, and the pastor was like, "Oh, my wife will take you to her tea lounge, which is right next door."
Yeah.
We were like, tea lounge? Pam was like, I don't want no tea. I don't want no tea. She couldn't hang out with the boys. Yep.
That plays out a lot. I saw it play out when I was a kid, but as an adult, it still plays out. I remember going to preach at a church in 2015. I wrote about it in Breaking All the Rules. Now, my dad was ordaining women in ministry back in the 80s and 90s. I went back to California, the same area where I was raised, where my dad was ordaining women. I went back in 2015 to preach, and I was sitting in the pastor's study. And before we went out to the sanctuary, he said, before we go out, I need to let you know there's going to be women in the pulpit. I was like, okay, like, great. Why are you telling me that? He said, well, a lot of people around here don't like that. I've had pastors in this area completely cut off fellowship with me because I have women in my pulpit. And I was like, wow, it's 2015 in California where people think everything is so progressive. But Black church in California is like really repressive in many ways. Like they had to give me a disclaimer that there will be women in the pulpit. So misogyny plays out in many different ways. Steve, I'm sure after all we've said, something else has come up for you. Is there anything you want to add to that piece?
Yeah, so it kind of goes back to how Myron was kind of laying out some foundation, and I kind of see it. I was reading something, I can't recall the author, so this is not my authentic original thought, but I'm going to steal this shit, and y'all going to say the Lord gave it to you today. They framed it as the church being the tree of gender equality, the roots then representing the core of male patriarchy, where male dominance and control are located. And then the trunk becomes the social institutions that shape and support patriarchy. And then the branches illustrate the way individuals interact with patriarchy. And then the leaves resemble the passiveness that so many people have. And they don't object to being a part of the tree. But then there are some leaves that aren't passive, and they end up separating and falling off of the tree. And it requires leaves falling off of this tree for the whole system to lose its power and die. And so I think in situations like we have here in Holy Smokes, we have leaves here that have fallen off of the tree in hopes that we'll attract more leaves to fall off of this tree so that this whole tree of patriarchy dies.
And yes, sir. And hopefully we can plant a new tree. Mm-hmm. That would be the idea. I would love for us to be able to plant a new tree where there's not this war between the sexes, where men are constantly trying to assert our power over women, many times because I believe we're intimidated by their power. The same way I believe that racism is a result of how white people are intimidated by the power that is innate within Black people because they witnessed it. They saw it.
Smith, you said something right there. I'm going to throw in this theological thing here that I got to say, that I think one of the roots of misogyny is that we define ourselves in opposition to women. But here's what I've discovered. And this came to me today as I was reading the Genesis narrative, that we are not different than women. We have differences, but we're not different than women. So when folks get up, men and women are completely different from one another. That's a lie. And you know why it's a lie? Because the theological narrative in Genesis 2:1 and 2 and 3 say that man and woman were made from the same substance. Right? And so we aren't different. We have differences. We're not different. Go ahead, Grayson.
Yeah, and just to build off of that, it was the sameness. It was the homo-ness, if you will, between the first humans who we know as Adam and Eve, that allowed them to be kin with one another, because there were all the animals that God created, and even God's self was not enough. And I know we've talked about this before. Nikki Hardeman said it very well. But to your point, it's because men and women and the genders between and outside of, and the sexes between and outside of, because it's not a battle between the sexes, it's a battle among the sexes, because we know there's more than two. Yeah, it's the kinship. And so what you said.
I'm with you. We're not different. We've got differences.
Absolutely. I mean, both men and women have testosterone and estrogen. But like generally women have more estrogen, men have more testosterone. But it's not like men are all testosterone, women are all estrogen. And then you have people who are in the middle, who have like kind of a balance between the two. That's why we're completely reframing our understanding of gender because people have all of these different components that fall into the same people. If you're wondering what we're talking about, go back and check out Redeeming Masculinity and Redeeming Femininity, and you'll see what we're talking about how masculine energy and feminine energy is present in everybody, regardless. So I think that's really important. So here's where I want to go with this, because it's really easy for us in these spaces to critique everything outside of us. It's easy to fall into that trap. And I think for us to continue to evolve, we also have to be introspective and sometimes check ourselves and question ourselves. That's the only way we can even get to this point. And I don't ever want us to lose that passion and being compelled to question ourselves and interrogate ourselves. So here's what I want to ask, and I want Steve to get us started. Steve, how might you have participated in that misogyny? Or maybe sometimes you still find yourself kind of participating in it now, if you can think of something. You want to share that?
For sure. I think that for a long time, I didn't think that women were supposed to preach. You know, that whole thing, women can't pastor church because they can't be the head of the household. So how are they going to be the head of God's house? You know, that indoctrination that we engage in. And again, it wasn't until I got to Mercer, got to seminary, and started the expansion of my thought process and digging deeper, unlearning what I'd learned before so that I could relearn some new things. In the current context, I think, and some of this is really not from a misogynistic lens, but it's just from an intellectual lens and lived experience lens. I do have sometimes a problem with a woman trying to tell me what to do, especially in the church context, because I'm no longer the senior pastor. So when a senior pastor tries to put a woman over me, and that woman ain't done shit that I've done before, ain't pastored to 21 years that I've pastored, ain't grown the church, ain't raised millions of dollars and all that, and you want to have her tell me what to do and how to do my job, is really, I know there's a component of misogyny in there, but there's also the component of lived experience. And so there's the battle there sometimes for me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I can understand that. And also at the same time, like, because of how well I know you, there's that tinge of misogyny there, and I'm glad that you acknowledge that. But because of how well I know you, if the pastor put a man over you who also didn't have your experience, you will go off just as bad.
I cut his nuts off too.
Right.
Actually,
Absolutely.
I feel better for the woman because you'd be kinder to her than you would the man. Okay.
That's true. That's true.
No, but I understand, because
he would become a eunuch by the time I was done.
Yeah, but there's still that hardwiring there, because like to be born into in America, yeah. And like for three of us here into the Black church, we're born into patriarchy. We're born into misogyny. It's all around us. It's ingrained in us in many ways. So we're constantly working against that and trying to reframe it. So I appreciate you sharing that. Myron, what about you?
Man, I tell you, I try not to do this. Read books just for men. I need to read some more books written by female theologians and female Bible scholars. Here's a true story. Here at the Faith Community, you remember we were putting together some curriculum about soteriology, which is salvation and the cross. And I had recommended a book, and thank you for this, Grayson. And I was like, this is the book that we should study through. And Grayson had just kind of a visceral reaction and goes, no, we don't need another book from another white man, because the last book we read was from another white man. And so what we did is we just scrapped the whole book, and we got together as ministers and created that curriculum ourselves, including the female ministers on our staff, because it wasn't appropriate for us to just bring another white man into the conversation, especially when we have a church that is as diverse as we are. So I'm trying my hardest to find other voices and other authors and amplify those and find out those theological ideas, as opposed to usually another dead white man too.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, and sometimes you have to be reminded of that. And I think that's something for men who may be listening to this to realize, like, you don't necessarily arrive. You're constantly working on it. Sometimes you have to be reminded. I think in order for us to really address the misogyny that we have to be open to correction. We have to be open to somebody saying, hey, have you considered any women? And not a woman just for the sake of a woman, because sometimes people will say, well, the man is the most qualified. Have you checked the woman's qualifications? Have you actually checked? Yeah, the man may have more people backing him, but that in and of itself is an expression of the patriarchy and the misogyny in which we have been conditioned. So I appreciate you sharing that. Grayson, what about you? I didn't feel like I deserved that at all, but I'm going to take it.
Also, I'm experiencing a bit of...
We got to stroke your male ego, Christian.
Harder.
That's fine. Go ahead, Grayson.
So I'm experiencing a bit of delay right now. So if things get lost or disjointed, that's why. So I don't say this as like a cop-out or also not as like a sympathy plea. But when I was reading through the questions before this started, my mind just leapt to and couldn't leave the way that I have inflicted misogyny on myself and upheld the system of misogyny and sexism and heterosexism in the way that I suppressed myself for 18 years as a gay man, the way that I did everything I could to avoid coming to that conclusion and living truthfully out of that realization and embracing the me that God made me to be. And so by me denying myself, suppressing myself, repressing myself, ignoring myself, lying to others and to myself about myself, the only thing that benefits from that is misogyny, sexism, and the people, the leaves who uphold that trunk. So I was essentially burying myself under that tree and hanging myself from it. So I know that I have ingrained biases, hardwired biases against women, against female-bodied people. But the way that I think I have perpetuated most significantly the system of misogyny in my life is the harm I've done to my own self and the harm I've done to my own psyche and spirit by essentially squashing it and kicking it to the doghouse for 18 years and then having to reclaim and relearn and redo myself the last, what would that be, 8 years? 8 years. And not to do it to other people, not to then judge people who are quote unquote more gay than I am or more out than I am or less gay or less out, like judging people for not being where I am in my journey. And so, yeah, like if there is misogyny in my life, I'd say most relatably, it is a self-inflicted wound.
That's a great point, which, I would have never considered. That's why it's important to respect people's lived experience, because that just never would have applied to me. So I appreciate you bringing that up. Believe it or not, y'all, we got like 9 minutes left. This has gone by so fast. Like, we're going to have a lot to talk about in the after party. What's up, Mike?
I just had a thought. Grayson, you said that misogyny was a self-inflicted wound. And I think all misogyny is a self-inflicted wound, right? Because we are made from the same substance. Every time we relegate a woman's voice to the back, we hurt ourselves, right? The greatest thing that we lose with misogyny is advancement. That woman might have an idea, might have an opinion, might have a thought that would further us as people, that might further a race, that might further us scientifically. But because misogynistic, we put her to the side and we lose that thought and that idea and that progressiveness. And ultimately, we inflict ourselves with the self-inflicted wound. And all humanity suffers that because of misogyny.
Yeah.
To Myron's point, when you look at the civil rights movement, it's amazing how women were the architects of all of that, and they were pushed to the background. They were not seen. And even when you see King at the march in Washington and they go meet with the president, The women tried to come, and King was like, oh, hell no. So here you have Black preachers that are fighting for people to not be oppressed, who are oppressing women, who push that whole movement. That would not have been that movement if it weren't for those Black women who were behind the scenes putting everything together.
And on top of that, you wouldn't have the March on Washington at all, and King wouldn't have nonviolence if it weren't for Breyer Dresden,
At all.
who most people still haven't heard of because he was pushed to the back of the back of the back for being an openly gay Black man, which, just shows, and to Myron's point, I agree. I think, white people are both victims and perpetrators of white supremacy, but it's meted out in such different ways. And I think the knife that stabs you for misogyny is not nearly as sharp, or at least doesn't have the same cut that the knife that stabs me. So I think there is a generality and a specificity to the experience that we all, like you said, I just wanted to.
But the truth is that all humanity is hurt. It's a double-edged sword, right? It hurts going in and hurts coming out, right? That's
you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. I know for me, one of the ways that I participated in it is in my in being complicit. Like, without actively acting out misogyny, I was just complicit for a long time. Like, I would never ask the questions. Like, going back to the story I told earlier, I was complicit by not saying, hey, why does my wife have to leave the room when we pray? Like, that's how I participated in that, because I could have said something, but in that moment I was like, do I want to push back on this right now, right before I go in church? Is that what I want to do? And so I participated in it in that moment. I've been in spaces where, I was invited to speak or preach in a lineup of preachers, and everybody was a male, as if there were no women that could have possibly added to this conversation. And as we know here, lived experience adds so much flavor and variety to anything that you do. And women have a lived experience that men just cannot relate to in totality. So having a woman being a part of any conversation is helpful. Of course, today we got all men because that's what everybody said they wanted. But so this was like very intentional. But in the same way, we're just as intentional about having women be a part of our conversations here at Holy Smokes, because they bring a perspective that men just would not have. All right, listen, we only got like 5 minutes left. I want to make sure Steve has an opportunity to respond to this. Whatever time is left over, we'll use it. But Steve, if you use the rest of the time, that's fine, because you're our special guest. Help us, Steve, by telling us, how can we as privileged people in this conversation combat the misogyny that we have witnessed and sometimes participated in?
Say that one more time, Christian. You broke up. I'm sorry.
No problem. How can we combat the misogyny that we've witnessed and participated in?
Yeah, we have to address women's dignity and inequality, because inequality leads to injustice. And so when I painted that picture of the tree, just chopping up and killing those roots. And then, of course, acknowledging that all religions push patriarchy. All religions push sexism. The sacred text of every religion subjugates women. And so we have to call the bullshit out, especially in our places of faith, because that frames so much of our existence. Call the shit out. Stop that shit. Or we're not going to participate in this shit, and we're going to create some new shit if y'all don't stop this shit. And we have to be bold enough to engage it at that very blunt level.
Yeah. Yes. We got to start calling it out. And that's a risk. Because when you start calling it out, sometimes you put relationships in jeopardy and you put connections in jeopardy, because some of us are accepted in spaces and the requirement is us being complicit. So you're accepted here as long as you remain complicit. And the minute you're not complicit anymore, you're not welcome here. So that's something that I think we really have to deal with. I just want to point out Her Grace, Tisha Dixon Williams, is with us in the virtual audience, and she just said something so good. She said, one day we'll talk about misogynistic women of the church, AKA honorary men.
AKA
Yo, you know, we've had conversations about that before, how like men are the architects of patriarchy, and in many ways women uphold it. And I mean, they're not doing it in isolation, but I had a conversation with my worship leaders today at TFC, and one of them said the greatest expressions of misogyny and patriarchy they've experienced in church have come from other women, which is really interesting, but we're not here to bash the women. Myron, is there anything that you wanted to say before we wrap this up?
Yeah, I guess, and this is coming from me, I think I just need to get out the way and let women do their thing. Let them flourish, right? We don't need to mansplain. We don't need to talk over them. They don't need our explanation to help them flourish. So sometimes we've just got to learn how to get out of the way and let them flourish. And so that's what I'm thinking is what I am taking from this conversation. I'll never forget, I heard Lettucey perform one time. Y'all know Lettucey, the singer. And this was wild. She started singing and then she started scatting. And Lettucey does this amazing scat, and it's a beautiful art form. She was about 2 minutes into the scat, and then she looked back at the band and said, "Damn, y'all in the way." And I think that's what sometimes we do. We think our notes will amplify their voices when it really dampens them. And so sometimes we've got to learn the lesson that Lettucey taught and just back up and get out the way. And so that's what I think we should do.
Oh yeah, that's great. That's great. I think all of us need to keep in mind that a woman's power is not a threat to our power. That women can be powerful. Women are powerful, whether we want to acknowledge that or not. But that doesn't take away from the power that we have. And I think that's the problem that a lot of men have. We feel threatened by a woman's power, when really a woman's power complements ours. When we all get together in a collaborative space, women only make us look better, but we make ourselves look worse by trying to suppress them and keep them pinned down. So I think we should just get comfortable with a woman's power and recognize that it does not threaten ours in any way. Myron, I'm going to catch up to you one day, I promise. We're going to continue this conversation in the after party with the Patreon community, but this has been great. This has been so excellent. Next time we come back, we're about to go into a 3-part series called Christian Cancel Culture. So the next episode that we record will be about Christian cancel culture, and we're going to discuss the topic of language. How has Christianity attempted and been successful in many ways at canceling our language? This is going to be good. I promise you, you want to be there next time right here on Holy Smokes, Cigars and Spirituality. Steve, thank you, man. We'll see you next time.